Welcome to From College to College. This podcast explores innovative teaching, learning, and quality in further education and community college, with lessons from both sides of the pond. Whether you're a lecturer, a leader, or a lifelong learner, this is your conversation. I'm Dr. Lauran Kerr-Heraly. I'm American, I'm British, and I've been involved in college education for over 20 years. Each episode, I share my own experiences as a history professor, innovation fellow, and quality lead. I also sit down with amazing college professionals from the UK and the US to highlight incredible practice in the college sector. We'll talk about what's working and why, and give you creative ideas to employ on your campus straight away. Let's get started. A student can understand the concept in class, but still can't start, organize, or finish the work. Sound familiar? Today, I'm going to define executive function, explain why it's a teaching and a leadership issue, and share some ideas on what to implement. A little bit of personal background. I have a neurodiverse house, and we sort of had suspected this to be the case, but during COVID lockdown, we thought our, at the time, 7-year-old was exhibiting some signs of ADHD. My partner and I had both taught for a long time, so we thought we would be able to recognize it in our own child, but as you know, it's not always that straightforward. It's a different context. So we did eventually have her screened for ADHD, and it was 100% yes. And while she was having the assessment, the assessor asked her, which one of your parents has the biggest struggles focusing? And she pointed to her dad. And he had kind of always suspected this about himself and went ahead and got tested at that point. And so in 1 year, we had 2 ADHD diagnoses. And this answered a lot of questions for us, gave us some tools about how to change routines, helped us understand everyone's brain a little bit better, changed our communication patterns. Medication also helped. And while all this was going on, I've been teaching forever students with varying neurodiversities, and I don't necessarily think it's helpful to say there are neurotypical and neurodiverse, but I do want to recognize the added challenges that students who are neurodiverse have. So I'd been accommodating students for a long time in the classroom, learning more about how the brain works and how to help students accommodate for themselves. But after COVID, probably like a lot of you, I saw a definite increase in attention span difficulties, problems organizing, problems focusing. It's like we had a whole new set of issues. Now, at some point, all of this came together for me, and I started learning the language of executive function. So that's what I want to talk about today is what executive function is, how it shows up in everything that we do. So, what is executive function? Basically, it's just the set of mental processes that help you get things done. We talk about executive function skills, and those are just strategies that you use to learn and do life effectively. Now, the good news is you already have some of these skills. You just need to recognize and improve them. Sometimes a parent might say to me or a student might say to me, "Oh, I can't manage my time at all. There's zero time management." And I said, "Well, how do you manage your time when you get to do something that you want to do? I bet you get your chores done really quickly or get started really quickly so that you can get on to the next thing." So it's recognizing where our strengths lie and how to harness what we do well to help us learn to do better. In my study and in my experience looking at what experts say, there's no expert that's going to say, here are all of the executive function skills and here are the categories. But to the best of my understanding and experience, I sort of put them into 3 categories. You've got working memory, which is also called short term memory, and that deals with the ability to understand, store, and use information. So, this is about remembering facts and figures, following through on tasks, and managing time effectively. Facts and figures obviously matters a lot for students and people working in education. We have to remember all kinds of things. In my history teaching, I have to remember certain dates so I can help students figure out chronology. This can be also remembering what your tasks are, not even how to do them, but what they are. And following through on tasks. It, so if you think about working memory as sort of post-it notes, that's how I like to visualize it. That you've got post-it notes with all the tasks that you need to do and they're stuck up in your brain and they only stay there long enough for you to work with them in order to follow through on tasks and then you can take them down. Now, when working memory is a struggle, it's sort of like all these tabs are open in your brain and the post-it notes get layered on top of each other and they slip off because the adhesive has broken before you get around to the thing. So, this is why working memory is something that is so critical in following through on tasks. Managing time effectively also fits into this because we're talking about being able to store and use information. So if you don't have a sense of how long something is going to take, you don't understand that, then you're not going to take the time that you need to do it. So that's working memory. The next category is mental flexibility. You might have heard of this as cognitive flexibility or shifting, but it refers to the ability to move between tasks and adapt behavior to new environments and challenges. So that's planning, it's organizing, and it's adapting to new information and environments. As college leaders and educators, we obviously have to plan and organize a lot. Think about this in terms of how flexible you have to be when you're in a meeting and someone says, "Oh, actually, we need this thing yesterday. So drop everything else and do this thing first." So you have to be flexible. I love a carefully curated task list, but we have to be so flexible with these kind of things. When we're planning lessons, we have to be flexible within those situations. I tell instructors that I work with it's a lesson plan, not a lesson guarantee, because there are so many things that we have to adapt to and be flexible to when it comes to students and their needs. There's a fire drill in the middle of your session, or there's a guest speaker coming in, or two students have an argument that you have to deal with. We have to be really flexible within those situations. You also have to be flexible in your organization, being able to think about where physical objects belong, but also how you organize your tasks. For students, adapting to new information and environments can feel really overwhelming. It We have a lot of learners in further education and community college settings that have been out of education for a while. It's a big deal for them to come back into a building where an educational institution exists in the first place. So, a lot of our learners struggle with mental flexibility when it comes to this of how do they adapt to new environments. For students who are neurodiverse, changing from classroom to classroom can be difficult. An unplanned change in schedule could be difficult. So building up this kind of flexibility and those skills really helps our learners. Adapting to new information is of course important because as leaders and educators, we are learning things all the time. We have to adapt. About 20 plus years ago when I was getting my teacher training, a lot of the psychology and a lot of the strategies I learned are still very applicable, but some of them are completely outdated and would not work anymore in a college setting. So it's important that we learn new strategies, that we learn new ways of thinking and we adapt to those. It doesn't mean we throw everything out, but that we're adaptable and we're able to synthesize that information and see, is that going to work in my context? Self regulation is the third category. This is also referred to as self control. It involves the process of understanding and monitoring your own emotions and behaviors. Now, you might be thinking, well, this is where my learners need the most assistance. Self regulation is difficult. It's not just about can they behave, quote unquote. It's not just about can they behave, quote unquote, but it's also about initiating tasks, focusing, and showing emotional awareness. As I mentioned at the top of the show, you might see a student who is very capable, but just cannot get started on a task. So, helping them get started, giving them strategies to get started, that is part of learning self regulation. The focusing part, if you think about it from your own perspective, if I have my phone next to me, it does what it's designed to do and it distracts me, right? So I know that for my own self regulation, if I'm deep in a task, I cannot have my phone next to me. But that is something I've learned to do to regulate myself. Our learners whose brains are still developing or who have come back to school after a long time don't necessarily know those things about themselves. So when we tell them for the 17th time to put their phone away, if we haven't explained why it's necessary and why I'm not just telling you off, it's thinking about what do you actually need to do for yourself in order to focus. Showing emotional awareness, that is kind of being aware of how you feel in a situation. I have to take a lot of emotional stock as someone who works in a college about how I actually am feeling in the moment and what I'm going to do with that information. So, if I identify that I'm really sad about a learner who is struggling and I've tried to help and they haven't been to class in 2 weeks, I have to be really upfront with myself about, actually, I'm really sad. Let myself be sad and then make a plan, right? But if I just sort of breeze through those emotions, then I can't actually address the issues. For our learners, it's also about teaching them because they often get to a point of overwhelm and they'll just sort of blurt something out or they'll get disappointed about something. They'll take it out on you, they'll take it out on someone else, they'll storm out of the room because they don't necessarily know to identify how they feel and how to sit with those feelings without negatively influencing someone else or themselves. So that's emotional awareness. These are all things that we can teach, that we can help learners with, that we can help ourselves with, help our staff with. But I also want to make it clear that when executive function skills break down, for students, it may look like they're completely disengaged, but they might actually be overwhelmed. For staff, it could be the same. If you're in a staff briefing or the back to school staff development day, whatever it is, they might seem disengaged, but maybe they're overwhelmed because we've thrown so much information at them. So, why do we need to improve executive function and how can we help people? Instructors do sometimes come to me and say, I really need some help with my planning. I need some help with managing how long marking is taking. I need to know a more efficient way to do XYZ, etc. And I'm always happy to work with someone. I ask the same questions of my team because I want to get their insight on how they're doing things so that I can do them better. And if they have great strategies, then I copy them and I share anything that's working for me and then figure out what works individually. But if you think about this from a student perspective, they need help translating assignments into steps. When I started teaching over 20 years ago, I actually used to plan out the first month for them. And I would say, read this many pages of the textbook on Monday, and then on Tuesday, you study for your exam. These are really basic examples, but you see what I mean. And I would give them sort of a time of how long it should take and some suggestions on time blocking, things like that. I did that for a couple years, and then for some reason, I got it in my head that students should just know how to do this and they should take initiative. It's like I was holding their hand and it wasn't worthwhile. Fast forward, I'm now doing that again because I sort of assume that these skills need to be taught, thinking about the context of most of our learners and their backgrounds. It's most likely that they have not been taught these skills or that they have not had the opportunity to practice them. So I tell them all I'm going to teach certain executive function skills. I have a series of videos that I show them that they have to take a quiz on about different sort of techniques, and they can evaluate whether or not they work for them and what they maybe need to improve. Students often send me messages sort of complaining that there's too much work, that I can't possibly read an entire book in the time you set out. And that's when I say, you know what? It actually is a lot to read. But if we break it down together, I bet you'll find some confidence with that. So they might not follow the timeline that I've set out, but they might come to me one on one and get some assistance that way. If you say this thing is due in 2 weeks, that's not a plan, right? Especially with work, family, competing course demands, all the things that our students have to go through. So, some teaching implications for this: providing clear first steps will help with that initiative, will help with getting them started. Chunking the work into milestones is also really helpful, and building in progress checks, the reflective task of saying, am I to where I want to be right now? And then in some cases, the instructor checking in to see if they are where they said that they have been. Helping students set targets, and then us as instructors helping them to meet those targets sometimes means a little bit more check in than we would love to do, but it's necessary, particularly in the beginning. So, for leaders, if you think about this from the perspective of supporting staff as well as providing an equitable institution for learners, not everyone has the same informal supports. They don't necessarily have parents at home who have been to college or speak English, or a neighbor who can help them study, or an uncle who's really good at chemistry that can tutor, that kind of thing. So, when it comes to providing equity for all students, we have to teach these executive function skills. And as I mentioned before, they can be rolled into the course. Some institutions have separate classes for these, and that's great too. But I do think every instructor should roll them in, and there should be some guidance from leadership on how that can happen. Executive function friction contributes to people leaving their jobs early. If the systems aren't clear, then it's really frustrating for staff. So, simplifying things, making it clear when deadlines are, this is when you have to have your scheme of work in, this is when we need your assessment plan, providing assistance on how to do that, providing examples of what exam access arrangements look like, etc. Leaders can also standardize routines and templates that reduce cognitive load. When you think about how many portals we have to log into and how much multi-factor authentication we have to deal with, that really overloads the brain. So the fewer places we have to go for information, the better. We can also train advising and coaching and support staff around executive function so that there are more people to go to for students as well as staff to get assistance with executive function skills. We don't just teach content, we can design learning environments and working environments that make executive function more possible. Some things to try, easy to implement things. A milestone based assignment. So, this is like I mentioned before, what are some mini due dates before the final submission? You could try something like I do with my learners to give them sort of a calendar for the first month of how I suggest they approach their work and how much time things should take. And then for the second month, have them try the same thing and turn that into you. I like the idea, like I said, of making the first step really clear. So having that clarity from the beginning could look like, what's a start here action? Sort of like when you go on a website and it says start here, you click there, start here on your assignment. It could be the same for instructors when they're doing their mandatory trainings or they're doing whatever it is. Here's start here. And then give a checklist for the first work session. I love a checklist. Not everyone does. Not everyone likes to tick off boxes, but it is helpful for people to be really clear about, I need to have done all of these things. Formative checkpoints are really important. I always offer for my students to turn in rough drafts of things before they submit them. With my colleagues and the instructors I support, I always say, you don't have to submit this report, right? You know, without anyone looking at it, I'm very happy to help you develop it. We tend to live in silos in colleges, and it's important to realize that so much of the work should be developmental and should be collaborative, and that takes off the strain of executive function challenges as well. Executive function is a teachable set of skills, and it's also a design challenge for both instructors and leaders. Educators can teach executive function skills, and leaders can scale conditions for better executive function success. So, your actionable step for today is picking one upcoming assignment and converting it into a milestone plan. What do you start with? What's your first 20 to 30 minutes start checklist? What are some interim dates? And then what's a short checkpoint, like a draft or an outline or a planning artifact before the final deadline? So give that a try and let me know how it goes. Thanks for listening to From College to College. If you found today's episode valuable, please subscribe. To get my free newsletter and access all resources mentioned today, head to the show notes. You can also visit my website to learn more about speaking engagements, coaching, and executive function support. And if you're enjoying the show, please take a moment to rate and review. This makes a huge difference in helping others discover it. Cheers, y'all!